The Annapolis Wherry design by Chesapeake Lightcraft was first released to the public as a kit in 1998. The Annapolis Wherry's design draws from traditional working craft of the 19th century, boats that started out as water taxis on the River Thames. These boats evolved gradually into swift recreational boats in the 20th century. These days, the term wherry refers to a fast, elegant pulling boat, usually with a sliding seat, suitable for racing or cruising. The Annapolis Wherry is all of these things. More than 1,000 have been built. The Annapolis Wherry was a revelation when it appeared because it was a lap-strake planked boat that was built using stitch and glue techniques. This scale model of the Annapolis Wherry is built just like the full-sized version, at 1/8 scale. The same assembly sequence, the same copper wire stitches and glued seams, but no epoxy and fiberglass, so the work is faster and neater. Expect to spend 8 to 10 hours to do a nice job of the model. Only basic tools and supplies are required, including CA glue, a hobby knife, and a sanding block. A complete list is in the printed instructions and at clcboats.com. You'll need a smooth, flat surface to build your model. Protect it with wax paper, as you'll be getting glue and paint on your table. Start by removing planks from the laser cut sheets provided. The planks are labeled by the laser cutter, so you know which is which, and in which order to fasten them together. Just like the full-sized wherry, we've had to cut puzzle joints in the planks so that they will fit in the packaging. They should slot together like this. Throughout construction, we'll be using cyanoacrylate glue, better known as CA glue, and even better known as super glue. Everything works better if you use these needle-nosed tips on the CA glue bottles for neater work. Apply a small amount of CA glue in the puzzle joint while holding it steady on the table. Along with the CA glue, pick up some accelerator. This makes the CA glue cure in seconds. This will really speed construction. Remember, it just takes a single spritz. Once the CA glue has set, use medium grit paper, say 120 grit, on a sanding block to smooth the puzzle joint. Repeat this process with all 10 Annapolis Wherry planks. We'll assemble the Annapolis Wherry hull with short stitches of copper wire. Trim a whole bunch of wire to about 1 inch long, or 25 millimeters. We will start, logically enough, with the number 1 planks. They're joined along the keel edge, which is the straighter of the two curves. Place the planks back to back as shown. Pass a copper wire stitch through the laser cut holes on the straighter of the two curves. Finish stitching the keel line. Again, it's the straightest edge of the number 1 planks. At this stage, you'll just want the stitches finger tight. Twist it as tight as you can with your fingers. We're not using pliers right now. Open up the number 1 planks like a book. Now you'll start to add plank number 2. Bend your wires into a sort of staple shape like this. These stitches might take a twist or two with the pliers. The key to the Annapolis Wherry scale model is aligning the planks at the puzzle joints. This is less true in the full-size 17-foot 9-inch Annapolis Wherry. In this one, however, you want the puzzle joints to line up exactly. Add copper wire stitches in the laser cut holes between planks 1 and 2. keep checking the alignment of the puzzle joints. The planks are marked left and right, with the engraving on the inside surface. Now we'll add plank 2 on the other side, making sure its puzzle joint is aligned. With the first 4 planks stitched together, we'll retrieve the 4 frames and the transom from the laser cut sheet. The frames may have very tiny tabs on them left by the laser cutting process. You'll want to nip these off with your sanding block. Start with frame number 2. Locating marks are engraved in the plank. Hold frame 2 in place with one hand and run a bead of glue with the other. Keep checking for alignment at the puzzle joints. The frames are engraved with their numbers, and number 3 is the next one to install. Note that some tightening of the wires with pliers may be necessary for a perfect fit of the frames. Install frame number 1. And finally, frame number 4. We'll continue in sequence, adding left plank number 3 and right plank number 3, and then left plank number 4 and right plank number 4. As the planks are added, they may be glued to the frames. It's time to start bringing the stem of the boat together. The sides are held together with copper wires, passed from side to side and twisted tight. Be careful with your pliers. It's easy to pull the stitch right out of the wood at this stage. Glue together the forward section of the boat along the center line. Transom installation begins now. There never was a pretty boat where the transom wasn't a tricky fit, and the Annapolis Wherry is no exception. There are lots of different planks coming together at all sorts of angles and meeting in one place. Start by passing 2 wire staples through the lowermost holes on the transom. Now pass these stitches through the corresponding holes in the number 1 planks. Remember that the transom fits inside the planking. There will be a small amount of overhang that you'll sand off later. Take your time as you stitch the transom in place. If things are not fitting together, it's probably because you're in a rush or things are a little out of whack. There it is, planks 1, 2, and 3 wired to the transom. Planks 4 and 5 come next. Once again, I'm making sure that the puzzle joints line up. Join these panels together at the bow. Uh-oh, I've got a misaligned plank. This one needs to be pulled back a little bit to line up at the puzzle joints. Just a gentle tugging will do it. And at last, the number 5 planks. And it looks like a real boat. That's a neat job of transom installation. Now, here's the stitched up bow. Notice that I didn't stitch every single hole. You only do that if you need to. You can leave a few blanks. The transom will be glued in permanently now. Take your time and build up a fillet or a bead of CA glue around the inside where the planking meets the transom. Look at your bow carefully. It's important that it's plumb, that it's a straight line when viewed from ahead. You may need to poke and prod at it a little bit to turn it into a straight line. Refer to the diagram in the printed manual if you need some help with this. A bead of CA glue is spread on the inside of the stem. One last check of the straightness of the bow. We wouldn't want to build a twisted Annapolis Wherry. Then we'll add more CA glue to the keel. Any frames that have not been glued to the planking need attention now. You'll want a bead of CA glue on either side of the frames. Retrieve the breast hook and the quarter knees from the laser cut parts. The breast hook fits into the bow and stiffens the entire hull. A few strokes of the sanding block will make the breast hook fit tightly. Glue the breast hook into place. The quarter knees reinforce the hull where it meets the transom. These will require small bevels so that they fit nicely into the hull. This is done with a sanding block. Here, a quarter knee has been shaped, placed, and glued. The opposite quarter knee is installed the same way. Okay, our Annapolis Wherry model is assembled, but the planks aren't glued together. Beads of CA glue are spread on the outside of the hull where the planks meet. The glue should fill the seam between the planks. Work neatly. If the CA glue runs down the side of the hull, you'll have a nightmare of sanding later. You'll glue all of the plank seams the same way. The copper wire stitches have outlasted their usefulness. It's time to get rid of them. The easiest way is to snip the stitches on the inside of the hull. You'll pull the remains of the stitch from the outside of the hull. During the process of removing the wires, you may find a few loose seams. Touch those up with a few drops of CA glue. The stitches holding the transom might well be buried in glue. It may be that you just trim these flush on the outside and sand the copper wire smooth. That's one reason we use copper wire. It's soft and you can sand it. I tried, but I was not able to snip the wires from the inside. I just cut them on the outside and pulled off what I could. The stitches in the bow come out easily. Sanding begins at the transom. Remember that the planks extend past the transom a little, and you'll want to flush those up. Those embedded copper wire stitches sand very easily with 120 grit sandpaper. Smooth the stem with vigorous sanding. Grab the seats and the skeg from the laser-cut sheets. Install the skeg now. The skeg is a sort of fin that's attached to the underside of the boat at the stern. It keeps you going straight while you're rowing. The skeg is slotted into the bottom of the scale model. A little bit of sanding of the skeg tabs may be necessary for a tight fit. Glue the skeg in place, and please make sure that it's plumb and not crooked. You don't want to be rowing in circles. A bead of CA glue down either side of the skeg will provide extra strength. The forward seat slots into place and rests on frame number 1. Start with a bit of CA glue on top of frame 1. Next, the seat top is glued to the hull sides. I had to squeeze the hull sides in a little bit for a perfect fit. The rear seat goes in the same way. The middle seats are marked for their respective frames. The laser engraving is on the underside of the seat. When I glued this frame in, my bead of CA glue was a little big, and this meant that the seat didn't slot into place perfectly. I had to use the sanding block to cut away a bit of the slot in the seat. You can see the small chamfer that I made in the slot so that it will fit into the hull. Rails stiffen the perimeter of the boat and provide an attractive trim line. They're glued to the hull, just as in the full-sized Annapolis Wherry. Okay, now it's fixed in place, and it's just a matter of adding a little bit of glue at a time and keeping the rail aligned carefully with the top edge of the boat. You would apply slow curing glue to the entire rail first, then clamp it onto the boat. But with CA glue, which dries right now, you'll just add a little bit of glue at a time. Start with about 1 inch or 25 millimeters at the front. Subsequently, add about a hand's width of glue to the rail in each increment. Use ordinary binder clips to hold the rail in place temporarily. Repeat the process down the length of the boat. The other side goes on exactly like the first. I used sharp wire cutters to trim the rails at the transom. Leave plenty of extra in case it splinters. The rails are sanded flush at the transom. There were some gaps in the glue line along the rail. I ran a bead of CA glue down the length of the rail between the rail and the hull. A prescription for an ugly Annapolis Wherry model is to ignore the sanding of the rails. They're the rim of the pot, so to speak. It's what everybody's going to look at. Be patient and really sand these smooth. It's a good time to catch some interior spots too. Assembly is complete, but we are far from finished. Clean up the dust with a rag and rubbing alcohol. One obvious finishing problem is that your Annapolis Wherry is full of holes. Now, in the full-sized version, these holes are extremely small, just about 1 1/2 millimeters, and they get filled up with the epoxy coating. But we can't make them that small at this scale. We'll use wood putty to fill the holes so that we can get to a smooth finish on the outside. This process resembles spackling. Put the wood putty on a little thick, then we'll sand it down smooth. Any unevenness in the puzzle joints can be dealt with at this time. With every hole and gap on the exterior of the hull filled, let it cure overnight. Start with medium grit sandpaper, something like 120 grit, and move quickly to 220 grit and 400 grit. To get into tight spots, you'll need to switch to a little square of sandpaper. Now the sanding really starts to count. The difference between a polished, professional-looking model and an amateur one is really just the amount of time you spend sanding. If you're patient enough to keep after your sanding, you'll have a beautiful finish. Any bumps in the hull surface are going to show under the paint. Final preparation for paint includes a wipe down with rubbing alcohol and taping with masking tape to protect the rails, which are probably going to be varnished. The tape I'm using here is 3M fine line tape, a very high quality plastic tape that doesn't allow paint to leak under it. It's also pretty stretchy. It gets around boat shapes nicely. The laser-cut Annapolis Wherry kit includes a fully functional sliding seat unit, just like the real thing. It's a moderately intricate assembly, but if you follow the step-by-step instructions, it goes quickly. Locate and release the parts from the laser-cut sheets. The first step is to assemble the monorail. This is comprised of 4 pieces of laser-cut wood, which are labeled. Some copper wire pins will align the monorail parts. Insert your wire pins in the monorail bottom and glue them in place with a dot of CA glue. Spread a bead of glue on the monorail bottom and add the first of the monorail spacers. Now add the second spacer. And finally the monorail top. You've created an I-beam. Trim the wire pins flush on the top of the monorail. Next up, the monorail stay bracket. The drawings in the instruction manual are a real help here. First, the little rectangle goes on in the back at the top of the monorail. Next, the vertical part of the monorail stay bracket. The foot brace angle brackets are glued to the sides of the monorail at the back. Notice the alignment of these brackets at the rear of the monorail. The outriggers are laminated from 2 halves of laser-cut plywood. You won't get a better chance to sand the outrigger smooth, but don't lose these index marks that were laser engraved on the outriggers. Center the outrigger bracket on the outrigger and glue it in place. The outrigger stay brackets are tiny rings that are slid over the outriggers. Laser engraved marks show exactly where they'll go. For the oarlock pins, you'll need to drill holes. Use a 0.8 millimeter drill bit and a hobbyist's drill. There's the hole. You guessed it, the oarlock pins are made out of copper wire. Press the wires into the laser engraved groove in each oarlock. Secure the pins with a dab of CA glue. Glue the foot braces to the foot brace brackets. Laser engraved marks guide the alignment of these parts. The foot brace assembly fits against the foot brace angle bracket as shown. The seat is laminated from 2 pieces. The piece that's to go on the bottom has been labeled as such. Round over the edges of the seat with sandpaper. The seat truck is 3 tiny pieces of laser-cut wood that allows the seat to slide on the monorail. What would be low-friction wheels on a real sliding seat is replaced by a few bits of copper wire in our model. Thread the wires through the seat truck. Secure the wires with a dab of CA glue on the outside of the seat truck. Trim the wires flush with the outside of the seat truck. Now make 4 more little snips, leaving just the stubs of the wires pointing inwards. Check and make sure that the truck will slide on the monorail. You can trim the wires as needed for a good fit on the monorail. Got it! The monorail will be a little rough from the gluing process. Smooth it up with sandpaper. Now the seat truck slides without resistance. Glue the seat truck to the underside of the seat where indicated by the engraved lines. Glue the outrigger assembly to the underside of the monorail on the marks. Make sure it's square. The outrigger stays are a pair of toothpick-sized diagonals that are glued on to brace the outriggers. You can break these, so we've included an extra in the kit. The outrigger stays span the outrigger stay bracket and the monorail stay bracket as shown. Secure them with a dab of glue. Slip the oarlocks into their holes in the outriggers. Bend the oarlock pin wire over and trim off the excess. That's it. You've built the drop-in sliding seat unit. The oars provided in the kit require some shaping to look like real sculls. Glue the oar doubler to the oar to get yourself some thickness. Take up your sanding block, armed with 120 grit sandpaper, and start smoothing. The drawings included in the kit have guidance on the final shape of the oars. As with the rails on the boat, clunky oars are really ugly on a model like this. You'll end up removing quite a bit of wood. Turning the square oar shafts into round sections is the first step. Keep rolling the oar shaft over on the tabletop as you sand to turn it into a round section. Handles are tapered conical sections. The laser-cut oar blades are somewhat fat and need to be sanded down into sleek oar blades. The way the shaft of the oar disappears into the blade is a matter of some artistry. It just tapers neatly into the blade until it disappears. To give the blades a spoon or concave appearance, I wrapped some 120 grit sandpaper around a bit of aluminum tube. This is a good start, but I've got a ways to go. More thickness was removed from the blade on the forward side. Now that's starting to look like a real sculling oar. To induce a little more concavity in the oar blade, I applied CA glue, then held it with a bit of curve. There! Now it looks like a real Macon spoon blade oar. One oar down, one to go. This looks fussy, but really only took about 20 minutes per oar. Before we get on with painting and varnishing, assemble the display cradle for the boat. The process for the cradle is fairly self-evident. Just make sure you have the Annapolis Wherry lettering the right way up. I had it backwards the first time I tried it. While the glue dries, press the cradle down hard on your flat tabletop to make sure that it doesn't dry twisted. Time to paint. Make sure your shop has good ventilation and use disposable gloves and a respirator to protect yourself from the fumes. For the painted hull of the boat, starting with a primer will ensure the nicest paint finish. This is a fast-drying spray primer. I'll apply 2 thin coats, sanding in between. I'm using 400 grit sandpaper here to get the smoothest possible finish on the primer. This step just takes patience. If you've ever wondered why your model didn't look like the one on the front of the box, it's probably because you didn't spend enough time sanding. When at last you think you're ready, give the hull a wipe down with rubbing alcohol. I don't believe that you need any special kind of spray paint for these models. Even the basic stuff, like this Rust-Oleum gloss, looks pretty good. I suggest a light color for a lapstrake boat like the Annapolis Wherry. White or off-white, something like that. Just as it says on the can, a couple of thin coats are going to yield a much better finish than one thick coat. And yes, you'll need to sand with very fine sandpaper in between coats. Here goes the last coat of white paint. This is it, your last chance to get the interior perfect before we apply varnish. Lots of sanding in awkward little corners. It'll be worth it when you're done. You don't want to get varnish on top of your paint, so mask off the painted areas carefully. The cradle will be varnished as well, so we'll catch it in this round of varnishing. I used a cheap clear wood finish spray for the interior and the rails. A bit of light sanding between coats, and then on with more varnish. Ultimately, I applied 3 coats to the model and to the cradle. The seats of the sliding seat units used to be varnished, so I'm going to coat the seat in varnish at this stage. To help with the paint application, I will once again use a primer, sanding between coats. I glued up some simple stands using popsicle sticks to support the oars while the final finish was applied. Here goes the black semi-gloss spray paint. In real life, the sliding seat unit is black anodized aluminum, so a semi-gloss black will give us the right look. 20 years ago, it was pretty common for these sculls to be wooden. These days, they're all carbon fiber, and in the name of authenticity, we're going to make ours look like carbon fiber too. For a touch of contrast, the oar blades were painted white. You may want to paint these in your school colors, as is tradition. For another touch of authenticity, we use heat shrink tubing to create oar collars. The plans show exactly where these go. Make sure the collars are in the same place on both oars. Shorter bits of heat shrink tubing serve as handles. The wire pins in the monorail line up with 2 laser-cut holes in the center seats. That's it! Your Annapolis Wherry model is ready for the mantelpiece. For more on this and other designs in our catalog, check out our website, clcboats.com. And don't forget to send us a photo of your finished model.